Unless the condo, the SUV, and your entire savings account are in my name, the wedding is off." Ethan said it with the same casual air he might use to order a pizza, not as if he was demanding I surrender everything I had spent a decade building. Our November wedding was just 3 months away. I had already put down over $40,000 in non-refundable deposits, and the man I was planning to marry had just turned our future into a hostile takeover. I stared at him, seated across from me in my home office. My office inside my condo, which I had purchased 7 years prior without a penny of his help, and a core of ice formed deep inside me. "I'll have to consider it," I replied, my voice a mask of calm. What I left unsaid was that I was already orchestrating something he would never anticipate. By the time he arrived for his final suit fitting that coming Monday, an absolute stranger would be admiring himself in his $6,000 Armani jacket, and I would be watching the entire drama unfold from the seat of my car across the street. But let me go back. To truly grasp how I arrived at that moment, you need to understand who I was before Ethan Cole entered my world and mistook my accomplishments for an open vault. My name is Ava Hayes. I'm 34, and I work as a commercial real estate attorney in Chicago. That condo Ethan wanted his name on? I bought it when I was 28 with money I had clawed together from 3 years of grueling, soul-crushing work at a firm that subtly hinted women weren't cut out for the big leagues of property law. The Lexus SUV he wanted the title to, I bought it with a single check at age 32. $42,000 I'd meticulously saved for that exact purpose. Because I refused to have debt, refused to have monthly payments, refused to let anyone hold any sort of leverage over my transportation. The savings account he demanded access to, that was the work of 10 years. A balance well over $200,000 that represented every vacation I'd skipped, every fancy dinner I'd declined, every weekend I'd spent buried in legal documents while my law school peers were out living. Every single dollar in that account told a story. Every dollar was a choice I'd made, prioritizing security over spontaneity. I learned the lesson of financial autonomy from my mother, though not in the way you might expect. I learned it by witnessing the devastation that follows when you lack it. My mother passed away when I was 26, just before I sat for the bar exam, pancreatic cancer that swept through her with ruthless speed. During her final weeks, when it was clear she would never leave the hospital, she clutched my hand one afternoon and whispered something that has been etched into my soul ever since. "Ava, wealth isn't what you make. It's what you hold on to and what you fiercely protect. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed for building a fortress for yourself. And never, ever hand someone else the keys to what you've built." She was speaking about my father, of course, though she never uttered his name. He had walked out when I was 13, and in the aftermath, my mother discovered she possessed nothing in her own name. No credit, no independent savings, no property that wasn't tied to him. At 44 years old, she was forced to start over from absolute zero. She clawed her way back, earned her real estate license, juggled 2 jobs for what felt like an eternity, and eventually found her own success. But she never forgot the feeling of those first few years of complete dependency. The fragility, the powerlessness, the nauseating realization that you had entrusted your entire life to someone, and they had left you with absolutely nothing. So when I bought my condo at 28, I was fulfilling her legacy. The market had taken a slight dip, making it just barely possible, but it meant draining my savings and signing onto a mortgage that was frankly terrifying. My peers told me I was being foolish. Just rent for a couple more years, they'd advise. Build up a bigger safety net. But my mother's voice was a constant echo in my head, and I knew it was what I had to do. For the next 4 years, I lived like a grad student inside a beautiful shell. My furniture was cheap and self-assembled. I didn't take a single vacation. I cooked all my meals at home. I drove a 10-year-old Toyota I'd purchased with the cash from my very first law firm bonus. Every promotion, every bonus, every tax refund was funneled directly into the principal of that mortgage. My best friend, Chloe, watch this unfold with a blend of admiration and worry. We'd met in law school, bonding as two of only a handful of women in our corporate law program, and our friendship had remained strong even as our careers took different turns. She chose public interest law, earning a fraction of my salary, and seemed utterly content sharing an apartment with a roommate and her rescue dog. "You're 31 years old and you haven't left Illinois in 4 years," she stated one Sunday during our regular run along the lakefront. "You're letting your life pass you by." "I'm building my life," I corrected her. "There's a fundamental difference." The day I made the final mortgage payment at 32, I sat on the floor of my empty living room and wept. Tears of relief, tears of freedom, the kind of tears that flow when you've accomplished something you weren't entirely sure was achievable. That condo was mine, utterly and completely mine. Every tile, every pane of glass, every square foot belonged to me because I had earned it. The next month, I bought the Lexus. It was a 3-year-old certified pre-owned, but I paid the full $42,000 in cash. Chloe thought I was insane all over again. Just get a loan. Rates are low. But I didn't want payments. I didn't want debt. I needed to know that if my world imploded tomorrow, I owned my home and my vehicle outright, untouchable by anyone. By 33, I had that hefty savings account and was on the partnership track at one of Chicago's most formidable commercial real estate firms. I was negotiating leases for towering skyscrapers. I knew the zoning code for Cook County by heart. Senior partners sought my advice. Clients asked for me by name. But I was also profoundly lonely in a way I couldn't admit to anyone, least of all myself. I would come home each night to that beautiful, silent condo and question if I'd made the right trade-offs. All my friends from college were married with kids. They filled social media with photos of anniversaries, family vacations, and shared lives. I had assets, professional acclaim, and financial security, but I had no one to share any of it with. That was my state of mind when I met Ethan Cole 18 months ago at a charity auction for a legal aid foundation. He was 36, impossibly charming, and worked in what he vaguely described as venture capital, which I later pieced together meant he advised tech startups on funding, though none of his clients ever seemed to actually get funded. But those first few months were a dream. He'd bring me coffee during my late nights at the office. He'd listen intently as I vented about difficult negotiations. He seemed genuinely impressed by my career, by what I'd accomplished, by the fact that I owned my home at 34. He made me feel seen, like someone finally recognized the immense work behind the success. Chloe was suspicious from day one. She'd pull me aside during brunch and say, "There's something so theatrical about him. Pay attention to how he talks about you to other people. It's always about what you possess, never about who you are." But I was so tired of being alone. So tired of being the only single attorney at firm functions. So tired of the crushing silence when I walked through my front door. So I brushed off the little red flags, the way Ethan always managed to pivot conversations toward my finances. How he'd casually refer to our place or our car, when in legal terms, everything was exclusively mine. How he never offered to split major expenses, but always had money for pricey gadgets and designer clothes he didn't really need. 10 months into our relationship, he moved into my condo. His lease was up. It felt like a natural step. And he began contributing $1,800 a month toward utilities and groceries. It seemed equitable. I owned the property, so he shouldn't be expected to pay market rate rent. But the atmosphere shifted within weeks. My clean, minimalist decor was suddenly dismissed as cold and sterile. He started bringing in furniture I detested without so much as a discussion, inviting his friends over for loud poker nights that left condensation rings on my coffee table. Then the comments about my career started. I worked too much. His friend's girlfriend was a Pilates instructor and had such a great work-life balance. Maybe I should think about shifting into something less demanding, like estate planning. Each remark was a small cut on its own, but together they formed a pattern of 1,000 tiny wounds that I was too invested to see. 8 months ago, I proposed to him. Yes, I was the one who got down on one knee at our favorite restaurant, presenting a ring that had cost me 2 months' salary. He wept, he said yes, and he immediately plastered photos all over social media with captions about being set for life and finally finding his forever home. Not his forever person, his forever home. That should have set off alarms. But I was swept up in the frenzy of wedding planning, tackling it with the same ferocious intensity I brought to my biggest cases. My share of the expenses quickly soared past $40,000. The venue at the Lincoln Park Conservatory, the photographer, the caterer, the florist, the string quartet. Ethan would sometimes mention the mounting costs but never offered to contribute equally. I told myself it was fine. I earned more. Chloe's skepticism deepened. She would observe him at parties, noting how he'd talk about our assets when they were all mine, how conversations inevitably turned to my condo's market value or my investment portfolio instead of my professional achievements. "He doesn't love you," she slurred one evening, swirling the last of her Pinot Noir. "He loves your portfolio." I refused to hear it. I was 3 months away from not being alone, 3 months from having someone to come home to, 3 months from finally attaining what everyone else seemed to find so effortlessly. And then Ethan sat down in my home office and presented his ultimatum. Transfer the condo, transfer the SUV, grant him full access to my savings, all of it, or the wedding was off. I looked at him across my desk, the desk I had bought with my first big bonus, in the office I had designed, in the condo I had purchased by myself, and something inside me crystallized. He didn't want to build a life with me. He wanted to assume ownership of the life I had already built, and he was using our wedding, our relationship, our entire supposed future as a bargaining chip to get it. "I'll have to consider it," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. He rose from his chair, confident in his victory. "Don't think for too long. We have vendor deadlines approaching." After he left the room, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about my mother's warning, about what she had implored me to protect, about the vast chasm between partnership and possession. And I started to plan something Ethan Cole would never see coming. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, replaying Ethan's words over and over. It wasn't just the ultimatum itself, but the delivery. The nonchalant tone, as if he were asking me to pick up dry cleaning. The practiced quality of his speech, as though he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. The immediate jump to threats when I didn't capitulate instantly. This wasn't a spontaneous request. This was a calculated move. Sunday morning, I met Chloe for our usual run along the lakefront. We'd been running the same 7-mile loop every Sunday for 5 years. Usually we'd talk about work, gossip about colleagues, or just enjoy the silence. That day, I unloaded everything before we'd even completed the first mile. Chloe stopped in her tracks, bending over with her hands on her knees, gasping for breath. But it wasn't from the run. "Repeat that. He wants what? The condo, the SUV, access to my savings. Everything transferred into his name, or at the very least, made joint property. 3 months before the wedding." She stood up straight, and her face hardened into an expression I'd seen only a few times. Pure, unadulterated fury. "Ava, that's not a request for partnership. That's a robbery with a wedding ceremony attached. He's framing it as reasonable, making it seem like I'm the one being paranoid for even hesitating. Of course he is." Chloe gripped my shoulders, forcing me to meet her eyes. My cousin went through this exact same scenario 7 years ago. Her fiancé wanted his name on her car and her house to prove she trusted him. She did it because she loved him and didn't want to seem like she was holding back. 2 years later, when they divorced, she had to buy him out of assets he had never contributed a single dollar to. He walked away with nearly $100,000 of her equity, while she was left scrambling to refinance everything back into her name. A cold dread settled in my stomach. "Chloe, I don't know what to do. You call a lawyer. Today. Not a wedding planner, not a couples therapist. a lawyer who specializes in asset protection, and you do not tell Ethan you're doing it. We finished the run without another word, but my mind was a whirlwind of calculations and fears. By the time I returned home, Ethan had already left for one of his networking brunches that never seemed to lead to any actual business. I showered, changed, and made a phone call I never imagined I'd have to make just months before my wedding. Monday morning at 9, I called Robert Sterling. He was a senior partner in the family law division at my firm, 65 years old with a reputation for being both brilliant and brutally direct. We'd collaborated on a few cases where real estate intersected with divorce, and I had always admired his sharp, no-nonsense approach. "Ava, this is a surprise," he said when his assistant connected us. "What can I do for you?" I laid out the situation as dispassionately as I could, treating it like a case file. The ultimatum, the timing, the specific assets Ethan wanted, the way he had framed my reluctance as a personal failing. The silence on the other end was so prolonged, I thought we'd been disconnected. "Robert? I'm here." His voice had changed, colored by a weariness that made him sound every bit of his 65 years. "Ava, I've been practicing family law for nearly 40 years. I've seen this exact play run more times than I can count, and it never, ever ends well for the person holding the assets. So what does that mean, legally? It means if you transfer those assets before the marriage, you are legally gifting them with no protection. If you break up, you have no legal standing to get them back. If you transfer them after the marriage, they become marital property, meaning they get divided in a divorce. Either scenario leaves you dangerously exposed. My lawyer brain took over, the part of me that could compartmentalize emotion. What about the timing? Is that significant? The timing is the single biggest red flag. Robert's voice grew more firm. An ultimatum 3 months before a wedding, after you've already sunk tens of thousands into deposits? That's not love, Ava. That's strategy. That is someone who knows precisely what they're doing and is using your emotional investment and financial sunk costs as leverage. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do? You tell him you want to consult a financial planner before making any moves, and you watch his reaction very, very carefully. If he's a legitimate partner who wants what's best for both of you, he'll welcome the idea of due diligence. If he's not, he'll escalate the pressure and try to guilt you for being prudent. We spoke for another 20 minutes. Robert asked pointed questions about Ethan's financial history, his contributions to our shared expenses, his employment record. With every answer I gave, I could hear the concern in Robert's voice mounting. "One last thing," he said before we hung up. "Document everything from this moment on. Keep a record of every conversation, every text, every financial contribution. If this goes south, and I suspect it will, you will need irrefutable proof of what actually happened versus what he might later claim happened." I spent the rest of Monday in a kind of fugue state I recognized from my most stressful trials. I was physically present, going through the motions, but my mind was a million miles away. I attended meetings. I reviewed contracts. I answered emails. But I was replaying every interaction with Ethan through this new, harsh lens Robert had provided. How quickly his attitude had soured after he moved in. How my home had ceased to feel like my own. How every conversation about my work had become a thinly veiled criticism. How he had never once suggested we save for something together, build something new as a team. His only focus was on me transferring what I already owned. The pattern was there, stark and undeniable, now that I was finally willing to see it. Wednesday night, we had dinner at my place. I'd picked up Ty on my way home from the office, and we ate at my kitchen table. The table I'd bought 3 years ago, in the kitchen of the condo I'd owned for 7. "I've been thinking about what you asked for," I began, choosing my words with care, about the asset transfer. Ethan looked up, his expression instantly guarded. "And I'd like to speak with a financial advisor first, just to make sure we're structuring everything correctly for tax reasons, for legal protections. These are huge financial decisions, and I want to be sure we're doing them properly." His face shuddered. The guarded look morphed into something harder, colder. "You're overcomplicating this. I'm being careful with major assets. That's not overcomplicating. It's responsible. People who are actually in love don't need financial advisors to trust each other." He put his fork down with more force than necessary. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're treating our marriage like a corporate merger. I'm treating major financial decisions like major financial decisions." He pushed back from the table abruptly. "You know what this tells me? It tells me you don't really want to marry me. You want a prenup, a financial advisor, probably separate bank accounts for the rest of our lives. That's not a marriage, Ava. That's a business partnership where you hold all the cards and I'm just some accessory you acquired. Ethan, that's not what I'm saying at all. You're making this difficult because you can't stand the idea of truly sharing your life. You've built this fortress of assets and achievements, and you have no intention of ever letting anyone inside. You want a partner you can control, not an equal." He snatched his keys and wallet from the counter. "I'm going to stay at Leo's for a couple of days. Maybe that will give you time to figure out what you really want. Because right now, it's painfully clear you want a wedding more than you want a marriage." The door shut behind him. Not quite a slam, but loud enough to make its point. I remained at that table for a long time, the food growing cold, my mind replaying everything he had just said. The way he had twisted my perfectly reasonable request into a character flaw. How he'd made me feel guilty for wanting to safeguard assets I had built long before he ever entered my life. How quickly he had escalated from a conversation to abandonment. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Staying at Leo's tonight. Needs space to think about whether we're actually ready for this." Then another. "It's hurtful that you don't trust me enough to build a real partnership." And a third. "I thought you were different. I guess I was wrong." Each message was a precision-guided missile designed to induce guilt, to make me doubt my own judgment, to make me reach out and apologize for having boundaries. Instead, I stayed late at the office, taking on extra assignments, keeping myself so busy I didn't have a moment to second-guess myself. Wednesday evening, I dragged myself home, exhausted after a brutal 12-hour negotiation over a commercial lease. I'd been fighting over liability clauses with a client who seemed to believe he could rewrite contract law through sheer force of will. My feet ached from pacing conference rooms. My head was throbbing from staring at fine print. All I wanted was a glass of wine and complete silence. Instead, I walked into my condo to find Ethan sprawled on my couch with his college buddy Leo. A football game was blaring from my television at a volume that made my headache instantly worse. Empty beer bottles were starting to collect on my coffee table, leaving damp rings on the wood I always so carefully protected. Ethan didn't even glance up when I walked in, didn't acknowledge my existence. He just grunted. "We're hashing out the bachelor party details. Leo found a spot in Vegas. It's going to be insane." I stood there for a moment, briefcase in hand, my professional attire rumpled from the long day, waiting for something more. An apology for our fight, an explanation for why he'd let himself back in after storming out. Anything. Nothing. "I'm going to get some wine," I said, to no one in particular. I headed toward the kitchen, too depleted for a confrontation, every muscle screaming in protest. The open concept floor plan I had fallen in love with when I bought the place, the seamless transition from the living area to the kitchen, the way it made the whole space feel so bright and expansive, was about to become the single most important design choice of my life. Because that's when I heard Leo's voice, carrying with perfect clarity from the living room. "Have you told her the Vegas budget yet? That's going to cost a fortune." I froze just inside the kitchen, concealed from their view by the angle of the wall, a wine glass in my hand, completely still. Ethan's laugh came next. It wasn't the laugh he used with me, which was softer, almost self-conscious. This one was different, colder, more calculating. "Not yet, she'll cover it, she always does." My grip on the wine glass tightened, Leo's voice full of admiration. Dude, you have her completely trained. My girlfriend would literally disown me if I tried to pull something like that. That's because your girlfriend doesn't have a paid-off condo in Lincoln Park and over 200 grand in the bank. Ethan's voice was casual, as if discussing sports statistics. Ava's good for it. She works constantly anyway. Might as well get some perks out of it. The wine glass felt impossibly heavy. I set it down on the counter, silently, every movement deliberate. My attorney brain snapped to attention. The part of me that recognized evidence when I heard it, that understood the strategic value of listening before you speak. Leo's voice dropped, becoming more conspiratorial. And the whole asset transfer thing? Bro, that's a genius move. Once your name is on that condo and the SUV, you've got real security. Even if things go south down the road, you walk away with a serious payday. That's planning for the future. I know. Ethan sounded immensely pleased with himself. It was actually my dad's idea. Everything inside me went numb. Your dad told you to do this? Yeah. He went through a nasty divorce in his 40s, and his ex-wife's name wasn't on anything. He got a little alimony, but that was it. He was basically broke, starting from scratch at 45. He told me, "Never marry a woman with assets without protecting your own interests first. If she turns out to be difficult or controlling, you're not left with nothing." It's just smart. I heard the clinking of beer bottles as they toasted. Then Ethan added the line that made my blood run cold. Plus, once I have access to her savings, I can finally fund that NFT venture I've been working on. She won't even notice if I move 75 grand into the initial investment. By the time we're married and she figures it out, it'll have doubled, hopefully tripled, and I'll be the one with the empire. She'll probably be proud I took the initiative. Leo laughed, a loud, genuine bark. That's cold, man, but I respect the hustle. And you're right. She works like 80 hours a week. She probably won't even realize the money's gone until you've already made it all back. Maybe you'll make enough to pay her back and keep the profits for yourself. That's the plan. She's so wrapped up in her commercial real estate deals, she barely looks at her personal accounts. I've watched her. She checks her balance maybe once a month. By the time she realizes $75,000 is missing, I'll be able to spin it as an investment in our future. I stood in my kitchen in my condo that I had bought with my money, listening to my fiancé and his best friend plot my financial ruin with the casual ease of people discussing a fantasy football draft. They kept talking about the Vegas trip, about the price of bottle service, about whether they should get a suite at the Bellagio. But I had stopped hearing the words. I was processing the raw data of what I had just learned. Ethan hadn't just come up with this asset transfer demand on a whim. His father had coached him, given him a playbook based on his own bitter divorce. This was premeditated, a long-term strategy that had likely been in place since before Ethan even moved in, and the NFT scheme. He had already decided to steal $75,000 from my savings, not borrow, not ask permission, steal. He had been observing my banking habits, timing his demand for access so he could drain my account without me noticing immediately. The word difficult echoed in my mind. His father had warned him I might turn out to be difficult or controlling, which apparently was code for objecting to being financially plundered, for standing up for myself, for protecting what I had spent my entire adult life building. I forced my limbs to move. I walked back into the living room as if I'd heard nothing. They both glanced up, then returned to their conversation about Vegas hotels. Ethan offered me a smile that would have seemed warm an hour ago. "Long day?" he asked, feigning concern. "Brutal," I managed to reply. "I'm going to go take a shower." I went into my bedroom in my condo, and shut the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling as though someone had just handed me the blueprints for my own demolition. He had mapped it all out. The asset transfer to secure his position, the savings drain for his speculative tech dreams, the entire schematic of how Ethan Cole intended to dismantle everything Ava Hayes had built. But he had made one fatal error. He had laid out this entire plot while living in the home of a corporate attorney who had dedicated 10 years to learning how to protect assets, identify fraud, and document evidence. I walked into my bathroom, turned the shower on as hot as it would go, and let the scalding water cascade over me until my skin was flushed red. I let it burn away the last vestiges of doubt, the final, foolish threads of hope that I had somehow misunderstood. There was no other explanation. There was only the cold, hard truth I had overheard in my own living room. Ethan wasn't building a life with me. He was systematically planning to strip mine everything I had worked for, piece by painstaking piece. First, the asset transfer, getting his name on property he had never contributed a dime to. Then, the savings drain. $75,000 pilfered for a high-risk gamble on digital art, something I would have vehemently opposed if asked. His father had literally given him a script on how to protect himself from me being difficult, which meant his father had taught him how to financially exploit a woman who had worked hard and built something real. He had handed him the playbook for financial abuse disguised as prudent planning, and Ethan had already concluded that I was too busy, too distracted, too consumed by my career to notice money vanishing from my own accounts, that I was an easy target because I had prioritized professional success over constant vigilance. I shut off the water and wrapped myself in a towel I had bought with my own money in the bathroom of the condo I had purchased alone, long before Ethan Cole was even a name I knew. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was someone I recognized, not the version of me who had been second-guessing herself for the past week, not the version who had felt guilty for wanting to protect what was hers, but the version who had endured 80-hour work weeks and sacrificed years of her life to build something that mattered. That woman knew exactly what to do. If Ethan wanted to play strategic games with my life's work, then I would play too. But my game would have rules he didn't even know existed. My game would have only one winner, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be him. I got dressed, dried my hair, and started making calls. First to Robert Sterling, leaving a terse voicemail about needing to discuss an urgent development. Then to my building's manager about scheduling a lock change. Then to Chloe, with just 3 words. You were right. By the time I walked back out of my bedroom, composed and calm, I had already begun to construct my counteroffensive. Ethan looked up from the couch, beer still in hand. Feeling better? Much better, I said, and I meant it. Ethan and Leo left around midnight, both of them loud and drunk and utterly oblivious to the fact that I had overheard every single damning word of their conversation. After they stumbled out the door, I stood in my living room surveying the beer bottles they'd left, the condensation rings on my coffee table, the general mess they had made of my sanctuary. Then I began to clean, methodically, completely. I wiped down every surface, threw away every bottle, and restored my home to its pristine state, erasing every trace of their presence. It was a symbolic act. I was taking back my space. Thursday morning, I was at my desk by 7. I had Robert Sterling on the phone by 8. I overheard something last night, I said, dispensing with pleasantries. Ethan and his friend Leo. They were in my living room planning his bachelor party, and I heard their entire conversation from the kitchen. I recounted everything, word for word, as precisely as I could recall. The Vegas expenses Ethan expected me to pay, the asset transfer being his father's idea, a strategy born from his own divorce, the NFT scheme, the $75,000 Ethan planned to steal from my savings as soon as he had access. The silence on Robert's end was so long, I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Robert? I'm here. His voice had changed entirely. Ava, you need to lock down everything. Today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. What do I need to do? Change every password on every single account. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, credit cards, everything. Change every security question. If he has any visibility into any of your accounts, even just knowing the login, you sever his access immediately. Then you change your locks, all of them. The entrance, the deadbolts, the garage access, every single lock in that condo. My pen was flying across a legal pad, taking notes just as I'd been trained in law school. What about documentation? Write down everything you remember from that conversation while it's fresh. Use exact quotes if you can, close paraphrases if not. Note the date, the time, the location, who was present. Create a spreadsheet detailing what you owned before Ethan versus what you purchased together. I imagine it's going to be heavily skewed toward your pre-existing assets. Take photographs of every room, documenting your property, back up everything to an encrypted cloud drive, and send copies to me and to someone you trust implicitly. Chloe. Perfect. Do all of this today. If this escalates to a legal fight, and I believe it might, you will need proof that this was calculated fraud, not just a simple relationship dispute. I was already opening my laptop, navigating to my bank's website. The locks are going to be expensive. I don't care if they cost $5,000. Change them today. He has keys to your home and a plan to drain your savings. You cannot allow him to have physical access to your space while you're securing your accounts. By 9 a.m., I had changed every password on every financial account I owned. By 10, I had updated all my security questions to answers Ethan could never guess, replacing my mother's maiden name with obscure literary references only I would know, and my first pet's name with a randomly generated string of characters. I was creating layers of security that would take a professional hacker to breach. At 11, I called my building's property manager, a woman named Patricia who is always a model of efficiency. Patricia, I need to have all the locks in my unit changed. Today, if possible, but tomorrow at the absolute latest. Oh, is everything all right, Ava? I'm ending my engagement. My fiancé has keys and I need them to be non-functional immediately. Her tone shifted, warming with understanding. I understand completely. Let me call our locksmith. With the smart lock system you have, it's going to run about $1,500 for the unit, the deadbolt, and reprogramming the garage access codes. That's fine. Can they do it tomorrow? I'll mark it as a priority. Will you be home? No, but I'll provide you with authorization to let them in. Just please ensure it's done before the end of the day on Friday. Consider it done. And Ava? I'm sorry you're going through this. After I hung up, I opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting. One column for assets I owned before Ethan moved in, another for items we had purchased jointly. The condo, 100% mine. Purchased 7 years ago. Mortgage paid off 3 years ago. The Lexus SUV, 100% mine. Purchased 2 years ago with cash. Furniture, roughly 95% mine. Accumulated over 7 years. Joint purchases. A high-end espresso machine, maybe $500. A set of cookware I never liked, about $400. A few decorative pillows for the couch, maybe $250. A smart TV he insisted on, $800. Total joint purchases, just under $2,000, out of an estimated $300,000 worth of assets within the condo itself. I created another spreadsheet tracking Ethan's financial contributions since moving in. $1,800 a month for 10 months, $18,000 total for utilities, groceries, and incidentals. Nothing toward the non-existent mortgage, nothing toward property taxes or HOA dues, nothing toward the actual ownership of anything. Then I moved from room to room with my phone, photographing everything, every angle, every piece of furniture, the art, the appliances, the flooring, the light fixtures. I was creating a time-stamped visual record of what existed in my space before I surgically removed Ethan from it. I encrypted the entire file and uploaded it to a secure cloud server, then sent access links to Robert and Chloe with a simple subject line: documentation. Chloe called me instantly. What the hell am I looking at? Evidence. In case Ethan tries to claim he contributed to any of my major assets or has rights to anything in the condo. You're really doing this. I'm really doing this. Good. Her voice was fierce. He deserves every single thing that is coming his way. Friday afternoon, while Ethan was supposedly at one of his work meetings, which I now understood were just coffee dates that never produced employment, I made a call that felt both wonderfully petty and entirely justified. I called Giorgio, the proprietor of the high-end men's boutique on Oak Street, where Ethan's custom wedding suit was being tailored. We'd had several conversations over the past few months as Ethan went through numerous fittings, fussing over the silk lining, the monogrammed cuffs, the precise drape of the charcoal wool. I had paid for all of it, a $6,000 suit he intended to wear once. Giorgio, this is Ava Hayes. We need to discuss Ethan Cole's wedding suit. Of course. His final fitting is scheduled for Monday afternoon. Is there a problem? The wedding is off. We've broken up. I'd like to donate the suit. Silence. Then, I'm sorry, donate it? You have a partnership with a veterans charity, don't you? The Veterans Professional Closet. Yes, we do, but this is a $6,000 custom Armani suit that I paid for, in full. Ethan has been living rent-free in my condo for 10 months while I have covered every single wedding expense. I want that suit donated to a veteran who will actually use it. Someone who will wear it with pride to a job interview, not as a costume to a fraudulent wedding. Giorgio was quiet for a long moment. If you paid for it, then legally it is your property to donate. But are you certain? This is a very expensive gesture. I am absolutely certain. He has a final fitting scheduled for Monday afternoon. I want the suit gone before he arrives. Can someone from the charity pick it up tomorrow? I can arrange that. But Ava, he is going to be extremely upset when he shows up and finds the suit is gone. That is the point. And Giorgio, when he does show up, just tell him there was a misunderstanding and his suit was donated. Do not mention my involvement unless he presses you directly. This sounds like there's quite a story here. There is. And it ends with a deserving veteran getting a beautiful suit instead of a con artist wearing it to a wedding that was only ever about getting his hands on my assets. Saturday morning, I woke up with absolute clarity. I drove to the Lincoln Park Conservatory, where we had booked our ceremony. The coordinator, Jennifer, looked concerned the moment she saw me walk in alone. Ava, is Ethan joining you? No, I need to cancel the wedding. Her expression softened into professional sympathy. I'm so very sorry. Let me pull up your contract. She typed for a moment. The deposit is non-refundable, and with a cancellation inside of 90 days, we retain 60% of the remaining balance. The total forfeiture would be about $16,000. I pulled out my checkbook without flinching. I'd like to pay that off now. For the next 2 hours, I systematically dismantled our wedding. The photographer, $2,500 lost. The caterer, $4,000 gone. The florist, $2,000. The string quartet, $1,500. Each cancellation felt like severing a cord that had been slowly strangling me. By noon, I had spent nearly $26,000 canceling a wedding to a man who was planning to steal $75,000 from my savings. It was still a bargain. As I was finalizing the paperwork with Jennifer, she mentioned something that made me stop. By the way, a young couple came in last week asking about your November date. They're both public school teachers. They absolutely fell in love with the conservatory, but when I gave them the quote, they said there was no way they could afford it. The bride actually started crying. It was just heartbreaking. Something shifted inside me. What would make it affordable for them? Jennifer did some quick math. If someone were to cover about $10,000 of the venue fee, they could probably manage the rest with their savings. My hand was shaking slightly as I wrote out another check. Apply this to their booking, anonymously. Just tell them someone wanted them to have a beautiful wedding day. Jennifer's eyes welled up. You're going through a breakup and you're paying for complete strangers to get married? I'm paying for good people to have something beautiful. Ethan was going to use my money to gamble on NFTs. This feels infinitely better. Sunday morning, I packed up all of Ethan's belongings, every piece of designer clothing still hanging in my closet, every expensive gadget he had scattered around my home, his magazines about cryptocurrency, which now felt like exhibits in a fraud case, his collection of self-help books about manifesting wealth, every physical remnant of his existence. I labeled each box clearly and stacked them neatly in my assigned parking space in the building's garage. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and composed a text message. I rewrote it nearly 20 times until the words were perfect. Ethan, I have carefully considered your proposal regarding the transfer of my assets. You were right that we need to be on the same page for this marriage. I have since realized we have fundamentally different definitions of partnership. You see assets to be acquired and exploited. I see a life's work to be protected. I have canceled the wedding and all associated vendors. Your belongings are boxed and located in parking space B12. I have changed all locks and access codes. Please collect your things by noon on Monday, after which they will be donated. I hope you find clarity on what true partnership means. I read it one last time. Then I hit send, powered off my phone completely, and called Chloe. Pack an overnight bag. We're going to a spa in Lake Geneva for the weekend, right now. We stayed in a quiet resort in the countryside. We hiked on trails where the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn. We drank wine by a massive stone fireplace. We talked about everything except Ethan. Chloe kept watching me, a look of concern on her face. You're bizarrely calm about all this. I'm not calm, I said. I'm free. There's a difference. Sunday evening, Chloe and I drove back from Lake Geneva as the sun bled across the horizon. For the entire weekend, my phone had been off, a dead weight in my purse. For 48 hours, I had existed in a world where Ethan Cole and his schemes were nothing but a bad memory. Now, sitting in Chloe's car as we entered the Chicago city limits, I held the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the power button. You don't have to turn it on yet, Chloe said softly. I do. I need to see the fallout. I pressed the button and watched the screen flicker to life. It took a full 30 seconds for the barrage of notifications to flood in. 92 missed calls, 74 text messages, 18 voicemails. Dear God, Chloe breathed, glancing at my screen. He had a complete meltdown. I started scrolling through the texts, watching Ethan's psychological state unravel in real time. The messages had started arriving within an hour of my text on Sunday morning. First came confusion. What are you talking about? Is this some kind of sick joke? Call me right now. Then, more urgent confusion. Ava, I just tried my key and it won't work. What the hell is going on? Call me. Then panic. I went down to the garage and all my stuff is in boxes. Please tell me this is some kind of fucked up test. Please just call me. We need to talk this out. Then anger began to seep in. You can't just cancel our wedding without even talking to me. We paid for those deposits together. This is insane. We had not paid for them together. I had paid for every last one. The messages continued, timestamps showing a frantic stream every 20 or 30 minutes for hours on end. Everyone is asking me what happened. What am I supposed to tell them? That my fiancé went completely crazy? You are making the biggest mistake of your life. I cannot believe you would do this over a text message. After everything we had, then the rage was fully unleashed. You know what? Fine. Everyone is going to find out what kind of person you really are. Cold, controlling, incapable of trust. You're going to die alone in that condo that you care about more than any human being. I gave up my life for you, moved into your sterile apartment, dealt with your insane work schedule, put up with your controlling bullshit. And this is the thanks I get? Chloe was reading over my shoulder. Put up with your controlling bullshit? Is he for real? Keep reading, I said. It gets so much worse. The bargaining phase began around midnight on Sunday. Ava, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. Please, let's just talk. Face to face. We can fix this. Forget the asset thing. We can just get a prenup instead. Would that make you feel better? I'll sign whatever you want. Please don't throw this away. I love you, not your condo or your car. I love you. Please just call me. Then came the voicemail from his father, which Chloe insisted we listen to on speaker. His father's voice was a blade of cold, controlled fury. Ms. Hayes, this is Richard Cole, Ethan's father. What you are doing is not only cruel, it is a form of financial abuse. You manipulated my son, made him financially dependent on you, and now you are publicly humiliating him. You will rectify this situation immediately, or you will face severe legal consequences. I can promise you that." Chloe's jaw dropped. His father literally coached him on how to steal your assets, and now you're the financial abuser. Projection is a hell of a drug. There were also texts from Leo. "You're a cold-hearted bitch for doing this over text. Ethan deserves so much better than a corporate shark with no soul." And a few from numbers I didn't recognize, likely Ethan's friends. "I don't know what happened, but you didn't have to humiliate him like this. Canceling a wedding 3 months out? That's brutal. I hope you're happy." I scrolled through all of it, feeling a strange detachment. No guilt, no regret, no urge to respond. Just a clinical curiosity about how someone could be so profoundly delusional about their own actions. "Are you going to reply?" Chloe asked. "No, there's nothing left to say. He knows exactly what he did. His father knows what they planned. Replying would only be an invitation for more manipulation." Monday morning, I did something I had been planning since Friday, something that felt both exquisitely petty and absolutely essential for my own sense of justice. I called in sick to work, the first sick day I'd taken in over a year. Then I drove to Oak Street, parked across from Giorgio's boutique, and waited. I had a large coffee and a perfect vantage point. At 2:28 p.m., Ethan's beat-up old Honda pulled up. I sat up straighter, the coffee cup halfway to my lips. He got out of the car with that confident swagger I had once found so attractive. Shoulders back, chin high, as if he were about to accomplish something significant. He was probably already rehearsing the sympathy story he would tell later. My crazy ex-fiancé canceled our wedding, but at least I'll still look amazing in this suit when I find someone who truly deserves me. He strode into the boutique. I checked my watch. 2:30. At 2:33, the door flew open and Ethan stormed out, phone already pressed to his ear, his face a deep shade of crimson. Even from across the street with my windows rolled up, I could hear him screaming. "What do you mean, donated?" He was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, his gestures wild, completely unraveling in public. Passers-by were staring. I don't care who technically paid for it. That is my suit, my wedding suit. More pacing, more screaming into his phone. "You get it back right now or I'm calling the police. This is theft." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the spectacle. Then something happened that I hadn't planned, something that made the entire situation utterly perfect. A man walked out of the boutique behind Ethan. He was in his late 40s with a military bearing and close-cropped hair that was graying at the temples, and he was wearing the suit, Ethan's suit, the charcoal Armani with the silk lining. The man stopped in front of the boutique's display window, looking at his own reflection with an expression of pure wonder, the kind that comes from seeing a version of yourself you'd forgotten could exist. He touched the lapels of the jacket gently, as if afraid it might vanish. He turned slightly, admiring the fit from different angles. He stood taller, his shoulders back, his chin held high. The suit transformed him. Giorgio emerged from the shop, walked over to the man, and shook his hand warmly. He said something I couldn't hear that made the man break into a wide, genuine smile. That's when Ethan turned and saw him. I watched his face cycle through a remarkable series of emotions. First, confusion. Why is that man wearing a suit that looks exactly like mine? Then, dawning recognition. That is my suit. Then, pure incandescent rage. "That's my suit!" he shrieked across the sidewalk. Several people stopped walking. A couple pulled out their phones, likely thinking they were about to witness a street brawl. Giorgio immediately stepped between Ethan and the veteran, holding up a hand in a placating gesture. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. Giorgio's voice was calm, professional, and utterly in command. This suit was donated by the person who purchased it. Ethan's voice growing louder, more frantic. "I don't care about his interview. That is my wedding suit. Mine. The veteran, whom I heard Giorgio address as Mr. Davidson, looked deeply uncomfortable and started to say something. Giorgio cut him off firmly. "You will absolutely not give it back. The suit is yours, earned and deserved." My phone started to ring. I glanced down and saw Ethan's name. I looked back up and watched him across the street, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes darting toward the boutique entrance as if he could will me to appear. I declined the call. I watched him stare at his phone in disbelief, then dial again. I declined it again. He tried a third time, a fourth. With each rejection, I saw his movements become more agitated, more desperate. Finally, he screamed at no one in particular. "You can't do this, I'll sue. That suit costs $6,000. Giorgio raised a single perfect eyebrow. I could see it clearly from my car. That exquisite expression of devastating calm. "You are welcome to pursue legal action. However, Ms. Hayes provided extensive documentation proving she paid for the entire ensemble. You would be suing the legal owner for donating her own property. I would encourage you to consult an attorney regarding the likely outcome of such a suit." The small crowd that had gathered was now watching with undisguised interest. Someone was definitely filming. Ethan stood there, face flushed, fists clenched, looking from Giorgio to Mr. Davidson in his suit, to the people staring at him. Then he turned and stormed back to his Honda Civic, the 15-year-old car he'd been driving when we met, the one that had sat mostly unused in my garage for 10 months while he drove my Lexus everywhere. He got in, slammed the door, and peeled out of the parking spot so aggressively his tires shrieked in protest. I watched him vanish down the street, then my eyes went back to the boutique. Mr. Davidson was heading back inside with Giorgio, both of them talking, the veteran still touching the sleeve of the jacket as if he couldn't quite believe it was real. I finished my coffee, started my car, and drove home. The best part wasn't Ethan's public humiliation, though I'd be lying if I said it wasn't deeply satisfying. The best part was knowing that at that very moment, a good man was wearing that $6,000 suit, a man who would wear it with dignity to a job interview, who would use it to rebuild his life, who deserved it infinitely more than Ethan ever could. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about ensuring something beautiful ends up in the right hands. When I returned to my condo that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. Watching Ethan unravel on that sidewalk, watching Mr. Davidson walk away in that suit with dignity and renewed hope, it was the closure I didn't know I needed. But Ethan wasn't finished, not by a long shot. By Tuesday morning, my phone was filling up with a new kind of message, not from Ethan, but from mutual acquaintances, people in my building, even a few distant colleagues. The smear campaign had officially begun. Ethan's social media had been transformed overnight into a masterclass in performative heartbreak. Vague, cryptic posts appeared every few hours. Sometimes you only discover a person's true nature when you ask to be treated as an equal partner. Narcissists weaponize their success to control and then discard the people who genuinely love them. Financial abuse is real, and it's not always the man perpetrating it. Each post garnered dozens of sympathetic replies. His friends eagerly piled on, adding their own observations about how I had always seemed cold and never quite matched Ethan's warm, open energy. One of his college buddies posted, "I always knew there was something off about her. Too focused on money, not enough on the relationship." Another added, "Ethan dodged a bullet. Anyone who cancels a wedding over asset protection doesn't understand what marriage is." The narrative was meticulously crafted, and it was spreading like wildfire. I was the controlling corporate monster who had emotionally manipulated Ethan, made him financially dependent, then sadistically discarded him when he asked for basic respect. I had stolen his wedding suit out of pure spite. I had canceled everything without a word of discussion, proving my domineering nature. People I barely knew started reaching out. A woman from my building's social committee, Ava. "I heard what happened with your engagement. I have to say, I'm very disappointed in how you handled it. That poor man seemed so devoted. A paralegal from another firm. Is it true you kicked Ethan out and donated his belongings without even talking to him? Even my dry cleaner made an awkward comment. I heard about your breakup. Sounds like it got pretty messy. I didn't defend myself to any of them. What was I supposed to say? Actually, he was planning to steal $75,000 from my savings to fund an NFT scheme. They wouldn't have believed me. Ethan's version was already cemented in their minds. Chloe was furious. You have to tell people what really happened. He's assassinating your character. Let him, I said. The people who matter will figure it out, and the people who don't matter, they don't matter. But Chloe was right about one thing. The story was permeating my professional community faster than I had anticipated. By Wednesday, I'd had 3 uncomfortable conversations at work with people who had heard something and wanted to know if I was okay. That's when Eleanor Vance stepped in. Eleanor was our firm's senior partner, 68 years old, with silver hair cut in a severe, elegant bob, and a reputation for eviscerating opposing counsel in depositions. She had been practicing family law for 4 decades and had zero tolerance for financial manipulation in relationships. Thursday afternoon, she appeared in my office doorway. "Close your door," she commanded. I did. "I've been hearing things," Eleanor said, settling into the chair opposite my desk, "about you and your ex-fiancé, about how you supposedly abused him financially and stole his wedding suit." My stomach plummeted. "Eleanor, She held up a hand. "I am not asking for your defense. I am telling you that I have already started correcting the record." "What?" "Last night at a bar association function, someone brought up your situation, tried to paint you as some kind of villain, so I told them the truth." Eleanor's expression was like steel. "That Ethan Cole attempted to manipulate you into transferring your condo, your car, and your entire life savings before the wedding. That you personally overheard him planning to embezzle $75,000 for a speculative investment. That you protected your assets and terminated the engagement, and that the suit was donated because you had paid for it entirely while he lived in your home, rent-free, for 10 months. I just stared at her, speechless. "You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. I have spent 40 years watching women get financially exploited in marriages and divorces. I've seen it play out 100 different ways, and it always starts just like this, with a man who views a successful woman not as a partner, but as an opportunity." She leaned forward. "You did exactly the right thing, Ava. And I will not stand by quietly while some con artist and his enabling father try to destroy your professional reputation because you had the audacity to protect what you built." My throat felt tight. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just know that the narrative is already shifting. People are starting to ask the right questions, and Ethan's story is beginning to crumble under the slightest scrutiny. She was right. By the end of the week, people who had initially offered Ethan their sympathy were now calling me to apologize. "I'm so sorry, Ava. I didn't have the full story. I should have come to you directly instead of listening to gossip. What he tried to do, that's just horrific. I'm so glad you got out." But the most unexpected call came 2 weeks after the boutique incident. My phone rang with a number I recognized. Leo, Ethan's college roommate, the one who had been in my living room laughing about the asset transfer scheme. I almost declined the call, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Ava, this is Leo, Ethan's friend. Can we talk? Can I buy you a coffee?" Every instinct screamed at me to say no, but something in his voice, a note of genuine distress, made me pause. "Why?" "Because I need to apologize, and I need to tell you something about what's happening now." We met at a coffee shop in a neutral neighborhood. Leo looked deeply uncomfortable from the moment he sat down, as if he were about to confess something he'd been carrying for a long time. "I need to apologize," he began, "for my part in encouraging Ethan, for being in your living room that night talking about his plans like it was all some kind of joke." I stayed silent, letting him talk. "Ethan's telling everyone you're a monster. that you financially abused him, controlled him, humiliated him. But I was there. I heard him talk about the asset transfer plan, the NFT fund, his dad's coaching. I know what he was actually planning. So why are you here now?" Leo ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely agitated. "Because I've seen him do this before. Back in college, he dated a girl named Ashley, convinced her to co-sign a business loan for some startup idea he had. She trusted him completely. He defaulted on the loan in less than 6 months and absolutely tanked her credit. She spent years trying to recover financially, couldn't get approved for an apartment, had to move back home with her parents." My chest tightened. "And you knew about this?" "I knew. I told myself it was just a stupid mistake he made when he was young. But then watching what he tried to do to you and how he's lying about it now, painting himself as the victim, I realized he was just running a more sophisticated version of the same scam. He didn't change. He just got better at it." "Why tell me this now? Because his dad found a lawyer. They're planning to sue you for the cost of the wedding suit and for emotional distress. They're going to claim you stole his property and publicly humiliated him. And I can't stay quiet and let that happen." Leo pulled out his phone and showed me a text thread with Ethan from 2 weeks prior, before the suit incident. Ethan was bragging about the NFT fund he was going to launch with Ava's money, about how she'd never noticed $75,000 missing, and about how once his name was on her assets, he'd finally have real security. "I'm willing to testify," Leo said, his eyes meeting mine. "If this goes to court, I will testify about what I heard him say, about what his actual plans were. It's the least I can do." I took photos of the text thread with my own phone. "Thank you. This helps. I'm just sorry I didn't say something sooner. I should have warned you before it ever got this far." After Leo left, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, thinking about Ashley and about how many other women there might have been, about patterns of behavior that don't change, but simply evolve. Then I called Robert Sterling. "We might have a lawsuit on our hands," I told him, "but we also have a witness who is willing to testify about what Ethan was actually planning." "Good. Let me handle this." Within 48 hours, Robert had drafted a legal letter that was a work of art, a surgical strike. It was 8 pages long, outlining precisely what the discovery process would uncover if Ethan proceeded with litigation. Documented evidence of his plan to embezzle my savings for unauthorized investments. Testimony from multiple witnesses regarding the premeditated nature of the asset transfer scheme. Proof that I had paid for all wedding expenses, including the suit in question. Bank records showing Ethan's minimal contributions to household expenses, and a proposed countersuit for attempted financial fraud and coercion. The letter's conclusion was devastating. Should your client proceed with litigation, please be advised that Ms. Hayes is a corporate real estate attorney with extensive trial experience and has unlimited access to expert witnesses specializing in financial manipulation in intimate relationships. The discovery process will be invasive, thorough, and extraordinarily costly for your client. We strongly encourage you to advise Mr. Brennan accordingly. Robert sent the letter on a Tuesday. By Friday, Ethan's attorney had formally withdrawn from the case. Ethan's father called me directly one last time. His voice was taut with a rage he could barely contain. "You think you've won. You think destroying my son's reputation makes you powerful. But everyone will eventually see you for what you really are." I kept my voice perfectly level. "Everyone already sees your son for what he really is. That's the problem. You coached him on how to exploit me, and now you're furious that it didn't work. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have recordings of your son discussing the exact strategy you taught him. I have witnesses. I have documentation. If you or your son contact me again, I will add harassment to the countersuit. Are we clear?" There was a long silence. Then the call ended. I blocked both of their numbers and never heard from either of them again. The lawsuit threat vanished into thin air, and slowly my life began to resemble something normal again, except it wasn't the same normal, it was better. Because I had learned a lesson Ethan and his father never intended for me to learn, that protecting yourself isn't selfish, and that sometimes the people who call you cold are just angry that you refuse to let them rob you blind. The weeks after I blocked Ethan and his father were strange, like adjusting to quiet after living next to a construction site for a year. I dove into my work with my usual intensity, but it felt different now, lighter. I wasn't going home to someone who resented my ambition. I wasn't constantly defending my career choices. My condo felt like mine again. I rearranged the furniture back to how I liked it, donated the gaudy pieces Ethan had brought in, and replaced the cryptocurrency magazines on my coffee table with novels I'd been meaning to read for years. Chloe came over one Friday night with wine. "You seem different," she said, settling onto my couch. "Lighter, like you've been holding your breath for a year and finally let it out." She was right. 3 months after the breakup, Eleanor called me into her office. "Close the door," she said, and my stomach clenched. But she was smiling. "The partnership committee met yesterday. We'd like to offer you a junior partnership effective immediately." I stared at her. I thought that wasn't on the table until next year. It wasn't. But I made the case that your judgment under extreme personal pressure, the way you handled the situation with Ethan, demonstrated exactly the kind of clear-headed self-preservation we value in our partners. You didn't let emotion cloud your thinking. You documented everything, protected your assets, and handled the fallout with professionalism. The committee agreed. "Eleanor, I don't know what to say. Say yes, and then get back to work. That Henderson lease isn't going to negotiate itself." I said yes. That weekend, Chloe and I booked a trip to Italy, 3 weeks in the fall. We stayed in small coastal villages, ate pasta, drank wine, and hiked along cliffs overlooking the Mediterranean. For 3 weeks, I didn't check my work email obsessively. I didn't think about Ethan. I just existed. "This is who you're supposed to be," Chloe said one afternoon as we sat on a sun-drenched beach. Not the version who was constantly managing someone else's moods and schemes. I'd forgotten what peace felt like. Don't forget again. When I got back to Chicago, my condo felt even more like home. I'd missed its quiet solitude. Then, 6 months after canceling the wedding, an envelope arrived at my office. It had the boutique's return address. Inside was a note from Giorgio. "Thought you should see this." And a card. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. The front simply said, "Thank you." Inside, the message read, "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Giorgio gave me your work address. I'm James Davidson, the veteran who received the suit you donated. I wanted you to know what that gift meant. I got the corporate security job I interviewed for, the one I wore your suit to. I've been promoted twice in 6 months and now manage security for an entire corporate campus. But more than the job, that suit gave me back something I'd lost: confidence, dignity. The feeling that I belonged in those professional spaces again. I don't know what happened between you and the person that suit was for, and it's not my business. But I wanted you to know that your generosity changed my life. I'm including a photo from my first day. I wanted you to see what your gift made possible. With deepest gratitude, James Davidson." The photo showed a man standing tall in front of a modern glass building, wearing the charcoal Armani suit. The same suit Ethan had obsessed over, but on James, it looked different. It looked earned. He stood with his shoulders back, chin up, a look of quiet pride in his eyes. He looked like he belonged exactly where he was. I sat at my desk holding that card for a long time. I framed the photo and hung it in my home office right above my desk. During late nights, when I was buried in contracts, I'd look up at James Davidson standing proudly in that suit and remember that sometimes the best kind of revenge is making sure something beautiful ends up in the right hands. 9 months after the breakup, I was at lunch with a client when I saw him, Ethan. He was at a table with a woman I didn't recognize. She was polished, professional, and laughing at something he said. He was using the same moves, leaning in, touching her hand, that practiced smile. My first instinct was to flee, but then I watched her look at him with the same starstruck expression I probably once had. When she got up to use the restroom, I followed her. This is going to sound crazy. I said as she washed her hands. But are you dating Ethan Cole? She looked surprised. Yes, for about 4 months. Why? I was engaged to him until about 9 months ago. I'm not here to make a scene, but please be careful. Be careful with your finances. Don't let him pressure you into transferring assets or giving him access to your accounts. And if he ever gives you an ultimatum about proving your trust with property, run. She stared at me. He told me you were a controlling ex who couldn't handle his ambition. I'm sure he did. I pulled out my business card. I'm just asking you to protect yourself. If you ever want to talk to someone who's been through it, call me. She took the card, her expression thoughtful. Thank you. 2 weeks later, my office phone rang. This is Sophie Chen. We met at a restaurant. I need to talk to you. We met for coffee and Sophie came with a file. She had done her research. She had found Ashley, the college girlfriend whose credit he'd destroyed. She'd found another woman from his hometown who'd spent months trying to get his name off her car insurance. There's a pattern, Sophie said, spreading papers on the table. He targets financially independent women, moves in fast, and then systematically tries to get his name on their assets. With you, he was more sophisticated. The wedding was his leverage. But the goal is always the same. You broke up with him? Yesterday. He screamed at me for an hour, said I was paranoid and that you had poisoned me against him. Then he said the most revealing thing. I would have made you wealthy anyway. As if my money was his to begin with, and he was doing me a favor. Sophie pushed the folder across the table. I documented everything. His attempts to get my banking passwords, his suggestions about adding his name to my car title. If you ever need it for anything, it's yours. Thank you for warning me, Sophie said. You probably saved me from a terrible mistake. Someone should have warned me, I said. I'm just glad you listened. October arrived, the month I was supposed to get married. Chloe insisted we go to the Lincoln Park Conservatory on what would have been the day. Trust me, she said. We arrived to find a wedding in full swing. It was the young teachers I had anonymously sponsored. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. The bride and groom held hands, their eyes full of genuine love. We watched from a distance as they had their first dance under the string lights I had helped pay for, and for the first time, I cried. Not tears of sadness, but of closure. My money had created real joy, not funded a fraudulent performance, and that made everything worth it. The months that followed blurred into a peaceful rhythm. I was excelling at work, mentoring younger associates, and hosting dinners at my condo for a network of single professional women, a space to share stories and support. My dating life was quiet by choice. I had developed a zero-tolerance policy for red flags. One man, on a second date, looked around my condo and said, "This is awfully nice for one person." I ended the date. Another mentioned I didn't really need such an expensive car. I blocked his number before dessert. 18 months after the breakup, Giorgio from the boutique called. Mr. Davidson, the veteran, wanted to take me to lunch to say thank you properly. I agreed, and he showed up with his wife, Karen. They were warm and genuine, and they became my friends. They reminded me that good people, people who value gifts without trying to manipulate the giver, existed. 2 years after I changed those locks, I woke up on a random Tuesday morning and realized something profound. I made coffee in my kitchen, the morning light hitting the floors just right. I hadn't thought about Ethan in weeks. He was simply irrelevant. I looked around my home, a space that was entirely mine. My career was thriving. My finances were secure. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own instincts again. That morning, I finally understood my mother's lesson. Wealth isn't just money, it's dignity, boundaries, and self-respect. It's the wisdom to see a predator for what he is, and the courage to walk away. I had kept all of it. I had protected all of it. And somewhere across town, James Davidson was likely putting on that charcoal Armani suit, standing a little taller. Real revenge wasn't about destruction. It was refusing to be the victim someone planned for you to be. It was taking a situation meant for your ruin and creating something good from it. It was sleeping soundly at night, knowing you chose self-respect over a sham relationship. It was sitting in my own home, drinking my own coffee, living my own life, completely and utterly free. That, as it turned out, was the sweetest revenge of all. I finished my coffee, got dressed, and left for work with my head held high. Ethan Cole had tried to take everything I had built. Instead, I kept it all, every single piece, and I had never felt more powerful. End of story.